What's going on, guys? Matt at Middleton Motorsports here. Another episode of Behind the Tune. Behind me on the dyno, 93 Trans Am, LS swap, 6L80 transmission. So let's go up here and check this thing out. This is a 6 liter out of a, so it's a Gen 4 6 liter out of a, like a late model 2500, or I shouldn't say late model, but 2010, 2012. It's got a BTR Red Hot Cam in it. It's got headers on it and paired with a 6L80 trans. So running this, instead of a stock GM ECU, is a Holley Terminator X Max. And that then talks to a stock GM T43 trans controller, which is part of the valve body on a 6-speed, the 6L80 and 6L90s. And it interfaces with the Holley. And then the Holley has its own, and we'll look at that stuff when I get to that point, but the Holley basically has its own set of torque tables to tell the T43 trans controller shift pressures. It also tells it the RPM, throttle position, all that pertinent information that it needs to decide when it wants to shift. So I've spent pretty much a whole day, which happens when we have a standalone engine management and we got to kind of start from scratch on a fuel table and timing table. Takes a little bit of time to dial these things in like that. So, but I finally got this thing dialed in and the fueling's looking good, the timing is looking good. So this is where we're at so far. And I think that's about all in on it. And that's doing pretty good. Again, through the automatic, I'm doing 4th gear pulls. So 4th gear, so the 6L80 and 6L90 GM transmissions don't have a 1-to-1. So 4th gear is like a 1.15. And 5th gear is like a 0.85 or 0.86. So there's really not like a 1-to-1 gear you can run those in to compare them to a manual trans. I can lock the torque converter. It does have a 2600 stall in it, but I am locking the torque converter. It's a billet triple disc, so I am locking that up. But it's kind of hard to compare 6L power numbers to like a manual trans or like an 8L or a 10L. 8 and 10 speeds, because those have 1-to-1 gears, and that you can lock the torque converter. You're into 1-to-1, and that's kind of comparable to a manual. Actually, the 6th gen Camaros with the 8 and 10 speeds, especially the 10 speeds, they in 7th gear will dyno pretty similar to the manual transmissions, like in the ZL1s. But these 6Ls usually are reading lower power. So if this car was a manual, we'd probably be seeing 420 to 430 at the wheels. But it is what it is. It's doing really good for what it is. The one thing that I am seeing on it that is a compromise for power, and I'm going to talk to the owner about it, is the way that this intake is set up. So you can kind of see this thing. It just has this little corrugated tube running from the ram air box to the throttle body, and I'm seeing pretty big drop in intake manifold pressure as the RPMs climb. So when I first whack the throttle wide open, I'm seeing right at basically atmospheric pressure. And as the RPMs build, I'm dropping about 5 kPa, so we're losing quite a bit. So I'm actually pretty happy with how this is holding on to power up through here. I think we'd probably see, I think that's probably why it's not continuing to build, but at least it's holding steady. Typically, a cam like this with an engine setup like this, with that intake manifold like that, and that LS3 style intake manifold, will peak power about 63, 6400. And you can see where it just kind of lays over right here. And I think that's due to that small intake tube, and we're just kind of hitting a restriction point, and it's just it's hitting an airflow limit. So typically, like I got a video, and it might be on the channel, I did a C6 Corvette Grand Sport with a cam, and that peaked, 63, 6400, like it typically would with an LS3 intake and a moderate size camshaft. So, but otherwise, I think this is doing good. I think if we fix that intake tube and you put like a nice 4-inch bridge there from the air filter box to the throttle body, I think we'd probably pick up another 10 or so, and you kind of see it climb up through here. Instead of laying over at 5,700, it would continue to climb, and I think we'd probably be in that 415 range, something like that, maybe 420. And then obviously it would still roll off. But otherwise, everything else is looking really good. You can kind of see down here low, indicative of a larger cam. This Red Hot Cam has quite a bit of exhaust duration. So you're going to lose a little bit of the bottom end. You can see kind of right here where the camshaft starts to do its thing. It kind of starts to hit its tuning with the intake manifold. And I like doing pulls on these. any of these cars, I like doing pulls way down at 2,000 RPM, and you can kind of get an idea of the entire power band, because when you're cruising down the road, especially a stick shift car, you're cruising around the street, you're cruising around at 2,000 RPM, you're not cruising around at 4,500 RPM. Race car stuff, different, but this is a street car. Him and his kid are gonna be cruising around the street, so I like to see what kind of power we're gonna be at cruising, and when he rolls on the throttle, obviously it's gonna downshift, but it's just kind of my practice of doing this to see the whole power band, so you can kind of see what the engine's doing top to bottom. So I'm gonna do one more dyno pull on it. I'll film that, obviously, and this is pretty much what it is. It might make plus or minus 2. I'm hovering right at that 400 mark. The last 3 or 4 runs I've done, I've been kind of playing with the timing up here, and just to see what it's gonna do. It likes, yeah, we'll look at the log. It likes about 26, 27 degrees. I had it a little over 27 and it didn't make any more power, so I dropped it back to 26, 26 and a half. So hopefully we'll match this 402. It's kind of heat soaked right now, so we may see a 399 or 400, but right around that 400 mark. I really wanted to hit that, and I did. So I'm gonna set the camera down. We're gonna do one more pull. We'll take a look at that final pull graph here, and then we'll take a look at the Holley Terminator data log. And you guys can kind of see how I lay that out. And yeah, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, I kind of figured that was gonna happen because I was like a back-to-back-to-back pull. I figured I was gonna start losing at some point here. And again, it was just because it was a little heat soaked. I shut the fans off and intake got a little hot. So yeah, it's gonna lose, it lost 4 horsepower, some heat. The IETs are about 4 degrees hotter than the 402 run. And the intake manifold from sitting, shut the fans off, picked up the camera so I could start this video. But it is what it is. We know it makes 400, and the tune-up was identical, but that's just a little bit of intake soak. So you can kind of see what happens when even a plastic intake will heat soak. But you can see the curves are identical. We can go take a look at the tune-up and the data log, so I'll open that up. So I'm gonna pick this laptop up and bear with me here. So, Holley Terminator, very, very, very popular, especially with like the turbo LS swap guys. A lot of hot rod guys use this. This is a super popular system. I've done a ton of tuning on this system over the past, well, since its kind of inception years ago. And a lot of my buddies use this system in their turbo LS swapped various drag car stuff. I know it's obviously it's very popular with that. And it works on an application like this with just an LS swap. You know, this car being a 93 would have had an LT motor in it, an LT1, the old you know, basically small block Chevy based engine. And swapping in an LS, you either got the choice of an aftermarket standalone like this, or wire in a factory ECU, which also would have been an option. But this works just as well. So I just had the spark table open. So it's typical standalone stuff. It's going to be map sensor based, so there's no mass airflow sensor. So obviously we have a scale here of map. You know, and I always like reading KPA. 100 kPa is atmosphere at sea level, RPM. You might have seen this in some of the other stuff I talk about with like virtual volumetric efficiency on GM stuff. Ford uses inches of mercury for whatever reason. I like the kPa, so when I'm doing Holley stuff, I use kPa. Some guys will use pressure, pounds per square inch. So, and that would be like non-absolute. I like this because it's an absolute scale. So we're on Earth, standing here on Earth, we have, you know, where I'm at in the Midwest, I have 14.1 PSI of pressure pushing down on us at all times. And, you know, so that ends up being 97 to 98 kPa. I like the idea of reading that absolute, because then from there we can go up when we're boosting, or when the manifold's in vacuum, we'll go down. It's just easier for me to think about versus negative to positive, and then, yeah. So anyway, so that's how I always set my Holley up. with just a KPA scale. Obviously, if this is a boosted deal, we would be seeing, you know, whatever, I'd make this scale however much boost would ultimately the vehicle would ever run. So, you know, like a drag turbo deal, you might see, you know, 400 KPA plus. Street stuff, maybe, you know, 250, 200, depending on the vehicle. Stock bottom end stuff, depends on the setup. And you can scale these to any way you want. You just, you know, you can just hit the scale here and hit this, any of these numbers, you can change these. I always make them a nice linear curve. So yeah, fuel table, same thing. So fuel numbers, I always look at my Holley in volumetric efficiency. Some guys will look at them in fuel flow. I'm more adept at looking at VE because that kind of translates into the actual airflow and the cylinder pressure. So when I'm making timing adjustments, I can kind of curve my timing on that. So volumetric efficiency is going to follow the torque curve, and that kind of dictates timing curve for me. So a lot of guys will look at this in fuel flow because they can estimate horsepower based on that. And I've seen a lot of drag racer guys asking me why I do VE, and it's a little bit more, it makes more sense for me. So you get kind of this phenomena where some guys don't like looking at this because as the RPM climb, the VE drops off, where they want to see the ultimate fuel flow. So you can see on a fuel flow scale, you're actually reading the actual fuel flow of the engine, which as RPM increases, you're going to continue to burn more fuel even if the power drops off. So you can see how that kind of changes the way you're looking at this and changes the scaling of it. When you're looking at VE, again, my peak torque in this thing, looking over there, was 4,500 to 5,000, and you can kind of see how the way that this map looks with the heat tracing of the colors, it's kind of backwards, but red is lean, low VE, and blue to purple is high VE. So once you're purple with Holley, you get to a certain kind of pink color, and then it just goes white, and that will indicate that you're out of injector because you put your injector size in this. And it knows you're putting your injector size, you're putting the size of the engine in, and it will calculate all this stuff for you. It's pretty sweet. The Holley stuff, this is a Terminator. This is obviously not the most sophisticated setup out there. Dominator's, you know, kind of the top of the line for Holley. And I'd say Holley right now, and they've always have been, has the easiest software. This software is just, it's super easy to use, and I understand why it's so popular with kind of shade tree, grassroots drag racers and street rod guys that are kind of getting into tuning EFI themselves and teaching themselves how to do it. It's pretty intuitive. When you're going into like the setup here, when you're going like engine parameters, and it's just, you can just easily enter all this information in, you know, what kind of injectors you have. And they have drop down, so look at all the different injector selections they have. So all the different GM stock injectors, and then a bunch of other, like, you know, FIC stuff that I like using, Excel, Holley injectors. Obviously you can buy Holley, they make their own Terminator and Holley injectors. Snake Eater Performance, a lot of guys run those. Bosch 210s, super popular with drag race guys on E85. And even some methanol guys run Bosch 210s if they're not making too much power. Ford Racing stuff. So it's easy. You just select the injector you got. It automatically populates all this stuff. You say how much pressure you're running, tell it it's gasoline, tell it's VE based, engine displacement, number of cylinders, and it pretty much just builds everything off that. It's very easy to use. It'll give you a good base table. These Terminator systems also come with a little handheld little touch screen that you can do a base tune in that. You can build a little tune. You tell it how many cylinders, you tell it the displacement, gasoline, all this stuff in this menu here, this kind of setup engine parameter menu. And then there's ignition parameters. You're telling it, you know, this is a Gen 4 GM, so it's a 58 tooth reluctor wheel in the crank, what kind of knock sensors, the firing order, what your timing limits are. It's just real easy to use. A lot of the other standalones there's a lot more to getting them set up. You can spend a whole day before you even attempt to start the engine on just setting up the data logging, setting up the inputs and outputs. This is just very simple. So like input and output menu, I mean, I could do a whole tutorial on all this, and you can find these things all over YouTube. But just if you guys have never seen this before, all sorts of different stuff, but not overly complicated. You can make it complicated if you'd like, but you don't have to. So this being again, an automatic, this is a Terminator X Max. So the X Max has the ability to control transmission, electronically controlled automatic transmissions. So this is a little different because like if you had a 4L60 or 4L80, obviously again there's a drop down menu, so you can just drop down if you're running a Ford Trans, whatever. So it's super easy to use. But this will directly control a 4L60 or 4L80. With the GM 6L 80 and 90s, they have their own transmission module that's part of the valve body, like I said before. So this just needs to send information to that as far as like throttle position, RPM, temperatures, and one of the main things it uses is torque. So there's a virtual torque menu here, which is kind of cool, that you kind of have a torque table that this is sending a torque reading, an actual torque, it's basically what it's called, engine torque, to the TCM. And the TCM interprets that and decides how much shift pressure and how fast to shift. This is just a throttle position offset. There's a virtual TPS curve here, which I got to mess with just a little bit more to get the shift points dialed in. I also am using HP tuners on this to do the trans. So I'm using HP tuners and Holley on this car, so it's a little more complicated than a typical deal, but I'm super familiar with both, so crossing back and forth between the two. Once I get the trans shift points all set up, which I pretty much got dialed in, just a couple little tweaks here and there I got to make on it to get the some of the part throttle shift points feel a little, at the right RPM. Otherwise, yeah. Again, I could dive into this all day. So, data logging. Holley has a very intuitive data logging. So we can go down and do that last pull you guys just saw, which I haven't even looked at. So basically, we open up I saved the data log right as I was done on the pull. Let me see if I can get this glare gone. So it's going to just give you the whole run. Obviously, I can see this red line is the RPM trace, so I can see right where the dyno pull was. So I just like zooming in right on that, and then you can see the basically the dyno pull here. So red's RPM. This seafoam line is the actual wideband reading. The yellow line, which if you can kind of see it in there, it might be kind of hard to see, is target out, and I can take some of these away. We don't need all these things here. So we can kind of simplify this down a little bit. Take oil pressure, knock, fuel pressure, that stuff is all pretty steady. And so now you can kind of see. The first thing I'm going to talk about, though, what I talked about before with the manifold pressure. So, manifold pressure right here, 97 kPa. That's right when I go wide open throttle, right at that's 2,200 RPM, 21. I started this right at 2,000 RPM. So you can see we're right at atmosphere. With the key on, engine off, I was reading right about 97 kPa. Go all the way to the top of the run, we're at 92 kPa. So we're losing a fair amount. It's kind of going like negative half a pound a boost, basically. So that's why the power is kind of leveling off. Mind the straight pipe Nissan stuff driving around the parking lot right now, if you can hear that. But yeah, so you can see that I'm losing a little bit, and that's why the power is kind of flattening out at the top. And again, if we had a better intake tube, I think we could probably alleviate some of that. But, it is what it is, and I tune around what I got. So that yellow line, you might be able to see it now, that's the commanded air fuel. Yeah. So, and this pretty jagged line, and sometimes this is just the way the widebands read, is the actual. So you can see I'm running right about that. Kind of just basically up and down. I'm a little rich on the hit here. Some of that was the transitional fuel because I hit the throttle pretty quickly, and you can see that lean spike all the way up, and then it came rich. So I got to work on the transition a little bit too. But this is looking really good. Timing, 24 down at the bottom. That's this kind of purple fuchsia line. And 26, like I said, I tried a little over 27. It didn't do anything, so I just took the timing back out of it. And again, because this is dropping away, we're losing volumetric efficiency up at the top really quickly. And I was able, that's why I was playing with the timing to see if I could kind of offset some of that airflow loss at the top, and it didn't really do anything. So, this is looking really good. Really not much. I mean, there's a ton more to this, obviously, this system, but that would be another video. And again, there's all sorts of videos on YouTube if you guys actually want to watch like a Holley tutorial. And leave it in the comments if you guys want to see more of this Holley stuff or more of the kind of tuning process. Getting into the tuning process, sometimes a lot of the time I'm crunched for time and sitting here talking about like what I'm changing, and then looking at the results. Sometimes that would take extra hours on the dyno, and if I have time, I'd love to do that for you guys. But a lot of people just want to click on this and see what kind of power this certain setup makes, and then they're done watching the video, which is totally fine. And then some guys want to see all the magic behind the scenes here, and that's why we make these videos, so you guys can see this stuff. So one other thing I was going to talk about again on that VE, and if you look at this thing in a 3D manner, which I use quite a bit, you can kind of see how, I'm kind of trying to do two things at once. You can kind of see how, again, the blue to kind of fuchsia, that's more fuel, and you see how I have this little notch coming down. That was just an artifact of, with the cam and the intake manifold to keep that air fuel happy. But you can kind of see how the power or the volumetric efficiency kind of drops away as the RPM increased. Same with the torque. The torque drops away. So the fuel tuning, the way I look at it, is kind of following the volumetric efficiency. And so I did have to pull some of the fuel out of the top end here to kind of compensate for some of that loss in airflow because of that tube. But again, everything was looking really good. That'll wrap it up for this car and the dyno. And like I said, I got a couple more things on the street to iron out, but we're about 90-95% done with this one. And I think this will be a pretty fun little street cruiser. With, like I said, it's got a stall converter in it, so it's going to come up pretty quick on the R's. And it's got 373 gear in it on a 26.5-inch tire. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty short first gear, and it's going to be pretty snappy on the street. So that'll wrap it up for this one, guys. Thanks for watching the channel. Check out social media for more videos and updates on what we're doing here around the shop. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later.